The Bruxa. There is a woman sitting in the dry fountain at the center of the garden. It is late. The moon is up. She is singing in a language that no one in the village has ever heard, in a voice that carries further than voices should, across the overgrown hedges and the cracked stone paths and the dark windows of the manor behind her. Her skin, in the moonlight, is so pale it seems transparent. Her hair is black and tangled, a storm that has settled around her shoulders and does not move with the night wind. She seems, at first, to be beautiful. This is the problem. The Bruxa has always seemed, at first, to be beautiful. It is what she is designed for, in the sense that the most effective tools are designed for a purpose, and this one has been honed across centuries of predation into something that does exactly what it needs to do. She appears. She appears to be young and dark-haired and human. And by the time that appearance has resolved into its opposite, the process is generally too far along to reverse at reasonable cost. She is not human. She is not young in any sense the word applies to the living. She has been old for longer than most of the human civilizations currently present on the continent have existed, which is the kind of fact that is easy to state and difficult to hold in mind while looking at something that appears to be a dark-haired woman in her early 20s. She is a Bruxa, which means she is a post-conjunction creature from a world that no longer exists, stranded in a reality that did not produce her and has been providing her with blood ever since. This is her story, as well as the story can be told by those who have survived the encounter. What she is. The conjunction of the spheres is the name that scholars give to the cataclysm that occurred roughly 1500 years before Geralt of Rivia walked the continent, in which multiple parallel universes collided and interpenetrated, leaving creatures from other realities trapped in a world that had not evolved to contain them. Ghouls, graveres, vampires of every classification, creatures with no ecological niche in the world they found themselves in, no natural predators to check their numbers, no place in the biological order that had been centuries in the making before they arrived. The Bruxa is one of these. She is not native. She is, in the precise academic term favored by researchers at Oxenford who study such things, a post-conjunction intruder. She belongs, technically and taxonomically, to the world she came from. That world is gone. The belonging is therefore theoretical, which is a polite way of saying it means nothing at all in practical terms. Whatever world she came from, whatever pressures shaped her in that world, she arrived here with capabilities developed elsewhere and has applied them to a population that was not equipped to resist them. The taxonomy of vampires on the continent is more complicated than the peasant mythology suggests, which is a polite way of saying that most of what common people believe about vampires is wrong in ways that matter. The standard folk categories, the garlic, the holy symbol, the stake through the heart, the sunlight that burns the creature to ash, are largely irrelevant to the Bruxa, as they are to several other vampire classifications. These beliefs were developed by people who survived their encounters with lesser kinds of vampires and generalized incorrectly to the whole family. The Bruxa does not care about garlic. She considers holy symbols to be interesting examples of human craftsmanship. She walks in sunlight without difficulty, though she prefers the dark hours because she prefers them, not because the sun harms her. What she is vulnerable to is silver, which is the one weakness she shares reliably with nearly every other supernatural creature on the continent, and fire, and a stake of sufficient length to actually reach and destroy what it needs to destroy, which requires a stake considerably longer than folk wisdom specifies. These are the tools that work. The rest are theater. Within the broader classification of higher vampires, those vampire species that possess intelligence, the ability to take human form and capabilities that exceed the basic blood-drinking predation of the lesser kinds, the Bruxa occupies a specific and well-defined position. She is powerful. She is not in the same category as the true higher vampires, the vampire superiors that specialists at Oxenford have designated as a separate and considerably more dangerous breed. A true higher vampire is effectively immortal, immune to silver and fire and most mainstream methods of killing, capable of regenerating from injuries that would destroy anything else. The Bruxa can be killed. She can be killed with the right tools, the right preparation, and a witcher who knows what she is before the first strike. The distinction matters because the Bruxa is often misclassified, and misclassification kills. She is formidable enough that a prepared witcher treats a Bruxa contract with significant caution. She is not so formidable that the contract is automatically suicidal. This is the narrow band in which she exists, dangerous enough to require specific knowledge and specific preparation, killable enough to make the attempt worthwhile. The folklore that has built up around the Bruxa across the different regions of the continent is inconsistent in its details but consistent in its structure. Beautiful woman in a place she should not be, seen at night, connected to a series of disappearances or unexplained deaths, resistant to the conventional protections that folk wisdom recommends. The water nymph comparison that appears in several regional traditions reflects the same surface observation: the pale skin, the dark hair, the uncanny stillness at the water's edge, without the same conclusion. Regions without a strong vampire mythology tend to assign the Bruxa to whatever supernatural category their tradition maintains for beautiful and dangerous women encountered alone at night. The continent has many such categories. The Bruxa fits none of them precisely. What she actually is: a creature from a world that no longer exists, surviving in ruins and abandoned places on a diet of blood and whatever the centuries between the feeding have given her to do, does not map neatly onto any of the folk traditions because none of the folk traditions were designed to accommodate the conjunction's aftermath. They were designed by people trying to explain what they were seeing, using the conceptual tools available to them, before witchers and scholars developed a more precise vocabulary and a more reliable set of countermeasures. The more precise vocabulary and the more reliable countermeasures have not eliminated the folklore. The villages on the fringes of wooded areas where Bruxa have been active continue to tell their versions of the story, which continue to describe the creature in terms that are recognizable but wrong in the specific details. The long fangs are in the stories. The blood drinking is in the stories. The sunlight-proof nature is frequently absent from the stories, which means that communities in Bruxa-active areas take protective measures that do not work while failing to take measures that would. The garlic in the window, the holy symbol by the door, the lack of silver, which is expensive, which is the one thing that would actually help. This is the witcher's contribution to the villages he passes through. The correction. Not delivered as a lecture, usually, the witcher's manner tends toward the functional rather than the pedagogical, but embedded in the practical advice given before and after a contract. What she is not. What you do if you encounter her before a witcher can be summoned. What you do not bother doing because it will not help. The knowledge spreads imperfectly. The villages that have had witchers through retain fragments of accurate information alongside the folk tradition. The villages that have not had witchers rely on what they have, which is better than nothing but not sufficient. The Bruxa, for her part, has been operating long enough to understand that the resistance she encounters in inhabited areas varies significantly based on how well the local population understands what they are dealing with. She prefers locations where the understanding is low. This is not a calculated strategic choice so much as a natural preference for environments where the hunting is easier, which is what most predators prefer and what most of the Bruxa's territory choices reflect. The last note. The short story that Geralt of Rivia's encounters with the Bruxa have most thoroughly documented contains a detail that scholars and witchers have returned to repeatedly in the years since, not because it changes the practical assessment of the Bruxa as a contract subject, but because it complicates the simpler version of what she is. After Verina's death, the curse on Nivellen was broken. This fact, more than any other in the account, sits unresolved in the documentation. The breaking of a curse requires a specific kind of agency, a specific alignment of intention and action that simple predatory feeding does not typically produce. What it requires, in the magical framework the continent operates under, is something closer to genuine feeling, the kind that carries weight in the metaphysics of curse and countercurse, that the curse recognizes as the real thing rather than its simulation. The Bruxa who fed on Nivellen for years, who used her dream manipulation to draw victims to the manor so she would not need to drain him, who fought a witcher to the death rather than simply abandoning the arrangement she was in, whether that constitutes love in any sense that the word usually carries is a question the documentation leaves open, because the documentation ends at the point where Geralt's silver blade ended Verina, and the curse breaking happened after, and the only witnesses were a grieving cursed man and a witcher with a contract completed and no strong professional incentive to explore the metaphysics further. What can be said is that the curse broke. What that required, in the world the continent runs on, is not nothing. And the song Verina had been singing in the moonlight before the final encounter was in a language no one could translate, in a voice that carried further than voices should, in the dark hours after blood had been taken. Whether it was mourning something she had already known she would lose, or whether it was what it appeared to be. A creature in the ruins of someone else's world, in the middle of the night, singing for reasons that were entirely her own, the record does not say. The Bruxa does not explain herself. She never has. She arrived here 1500 years ago from a place that no longer exists, and she has been in the ruins ever since, and she sings in her own language in the dark, and the continent has never learned to hear it. What remains? The precautions are these: silver, black blood, moon dust, a stake of the right length. Quen for the scream, though not complete trust in it. The awareness that the beautiful woman seen in the ruins 3 nights ago has been watching longer than you have been aware of being watched. The awareness that the dreams you have been having are not entirely yours. A Bruxa is not unstoppable. That is the point the experienced witcher makes to the local council when the contract is discussed, when the fear in the room is running high enough that the tendency is toward the conclusion that nothing can be done. She can be killed. She has been killed many times by witchers who prepared correctly and did not underestimate her and did not trust the folk mythology that fills in for knowledge in places where knowledge is scarce. She is not a ghost, and she is not a demon, and she is not the thing that common people believe she is, which is a creature of pure evil whose nature is fully expressed by the hunger. The hunger is real. The feeding is real. The deaths she has caused are real, and the appropriate response to a Bruxa who has been taking people from a village is to remove her from the situation by the method that works. And yet the song is also real. The language that no one else speaks is also real. The 15 centuries of surviving in a world that was not designed for her, in the ruins of places that humans built and then abandoned, in the long nights between the hunts, is also real. The witcher, after the contract is complete and the body has been dealt with and the fee has been collected and the road has begun to open up again toward the next town and the next problem, does not always know what to do with that. The world of the continent does not provide clean categories for what the Bruxa is. Monster, certainly. Predator, certainly. Something that came from somewhere and has been here ever since. Singing in a language no one can translate. In the dark. Alone. The question the most honest witchers ask themselves on the road between contracts is whether those two things are actually in contradiction. The answer the road provides, if it provides an answer at all, is that the continent is full of things that do not fit cleanly into any category the people who live there have developed. The Bruxa is one of them. She was always going to be one of them. She arrived that way, and 1500 years has not changed it. And she will still be singing in the ruins long after the witcher who took her contract is dust. Mind the dreams. The place she occupies. Among the vampire classifications that witchers and scholars have documented since the conjunction, the Bruxa occupies a position that resists easy summary. She is neither the simplest kind of vampire nor the most dangerous. The lesser vampires, the Achimas, the Fletters, the Garkins, are dangerous in the way that any large predator is dangerous, by being physically powerful and hungry and difficult to outrun. The approach to fighting them is straightforward once you understand their weaknesses. You prepare. You go in. You come out, ideally. The true higher vampires are in an entirely different register. A genuine vampire superior cannot be killed by a witcher at all. Only another being of the same class can destroy one, and even that is not a clean or reliable process. The witcher who encounters a true higher vampire and correctly identifies what they are facing has one viable course of action. Leave. The silver sword and the black blood and the moon dust and everything else in the witcher's preparation kit are irrelevant to a creature that regenerates from them completely and has the time, the patience, and the intelligence to wait out any engagement strategy a witcher can sustain. The Bruxa is between these things. She has the intelligence of the higher classifications. She plans. She manages her prey psychologically. She can form complex relationships and pursue long-term strategies, without the near invulnerability of the true higher vampires. She can be killed. She is very dangerous. These two facts exist simultaneously, which is what makes the Bruxa contract something that experienced witchers assess with genuine care rather than the mild professional attention they bring to contracts on creatures that are simply physical threats. The preparation for a Bruxa contract takes longer than the preparation for most contracts. The research matters. The specific location the Bruxa has chosen to inhabit tells you something about her. Because the Bruxa chooses her locations with the same deliberateness she brings to her hunting. Ruins suggest one pattern of behavior. An inhabited town's fringes suggest another. The abandoned manor with its convenient road access and isolated position relative to the surrounding villages suggests a third, which is the pattern that has been documented most thoroughly because it is the pattern that brings wanderers and travelers into her territory at predictable intervals, which makes for a sustained and renewable food supply rather than a finite one. Understanding which pattern she is running before you approach her is the difference between a contract that goes cleanly and one that does not. The witcher who arrives at a Bruxa's location having already understood what she is doing there is in a substantially better position than the one who arrives knowing only that there is a Bruxa and people have been dying. The Alps and the Katakans and the Mulas occupy parallel positions in the vampire taxonomy, each with their own specific capabilities and vulnerabilities, each descended from conjunction origin creatures that arrived with no ecological niche and made one. The Bruxa's relationship to these cousins is not particularly well documented. Higher vampires in the true sense appear to regard Bruxi and the related classifications with something between indifference and mild contempt. The distinction between vampire superiors and the rest of the vampire family is one that the higher vampires maintain clearly, even when Bruxi are present in their social vicinity. The Bruxa, for her part, does not appear to seek out or maintain relationships with true higher vampires in any documented case, though she is aware of the power differential and behaves accordingly when the question of proximity arises. Within the extended vampire family below the higher vampire threshold, social structures are loose at best. Bruxi who form hunting packs do so for practical reasons and dissolve the arrangement when the practical reason has been resolved. They do not appear to have traditions, rituals, or hierarchies that persist across pack formations. The singing is the one cultural trace, if cultural is the right word for something that appears to be individual rather than shared, that is performed alone rather than communally, in a language that the singer does not share with anything else on the continent. What witchers know. A witcher who takes a Bruxa contract takes it differently from a contract on a ghoul or a wyvern. The physical threat profile is manageable with the right preparation. The psychological threat profile requires specific countermeasures that must be in place before contact rather than after. Black blood is the preparation that matters most. The potion makes the witcher's blood toxic to the consuming vampire, which turns the Bruxa's attempt to feed into a problem for the Bruxa rather than for the witcher. It does not prevent the bite. It changes what the bite accomplishes. The Bruxa who has consumed black blood-tainted blood does not immediately die. The potion is not a weapon, it is a countermeasure. But the consumption creates a window of vulnerability that a witcher who is still standing can use. Moon dust is the tool for managing the invisibility. It cannot eliminate the Bruxa's capacity for concealment, but it disrupts it enough to make her movements trackable, which is enough. A witcher who can track the movement has a significantly better chance of surviving the encounter than one who is striking at sounds and impressions. The scream is the variable that no preparation entirely resolves. The Quen sign helps. It does not always help enough. Experienced witchers who have faced Bruxi before report that anticipating the scream and managing the body's response to it, the disorientation, the brief blindness, the impact that feels like a battering ram regardless of what signs or potions are active, is a learned skill rather than something that preparation can fully substitute for. The witchers who survive multiple Bruxa encounters do so partly because they know what the scream feels like before it comes and have practiced continuing to function through it. Silver works. This is the reliable constant. Silver to the Bruxa is what it is to every other supernatural creature vulnerable to it. A wound that does not close the way natural wounds close, that costs energy to fight against, that accumulates in ways that damage even a creature of the Bruxa's resilience over a sustained engagement. The silver sword is not a guarantee. It is a necessary condition for the engagement to be possible at all. The stake, if a witcher chooses that method, needs to be significantly longer than the folk wisdom specifies. This is one of the things that has killed people who arrived at a Bruxa encounter with accurate general knowledge but imprecise specifics. The general knowledge said stake. The imprecise specific was the length required. The gap between those two pieces of information is where the Bruxa continues to exist. The question of the song. What she sings about, no one knows. The language of the Bruxa is not documented. The world she came from is gone, absorbed into the conjunction's aftermath, leaving her stranded in a reality that has been home for 1500 years and has never been home at all. She does not appear to be in communication with other Bruxi in any way that scholars have identified, There is no evidence of a community, a shared culture, a tradition of knowledge transmission between specimens. Each Bruxa that has been studied or survived appears to exist in her own isolation, hunting her own territory, occasionally forming relationships with the humans who inhabit the same spaces, occasionally forming loose hunting alliances with other Bruxi of lower capability, but without the social structures that the word community implies. And yet she sings in a language that connects to nothing in the documented world, in the dark hours after feeding. She sings at the edge of overgrown fountains in the moonlight. She sings in ruins and in the cellars of old manors. She sings, as far as anyone has been able to determine, for herself. The most thoughtful of the witchers who have documented Bruxa encounters, those whose notes extend beyond the practical taxonomy of weaknesses and attack patterns into the more uncomfortable territory of what the creature actually is, tend to arrive at the same observation. The Bruxa is a predator with an interior life that predation does not fully account for. She came from somewhere. That somewhere is gone. She has been in this world for 15 centuries, feeding on a population that does not belong to the world she came from either. Both of them stranded by the same event, both of them making do. The song is the evidence that something survived the crossing that was not just hunger. What it is in a language no one else can speak. The translation has never been attempted successfully. The best guess, from those who have listened to it without dying immediately afterward, is that it is not a cry of distress and not a celebration and not a communication directed at anyone who can hear it. It is, perhaps, simply what the Bruxa does in the hours when she is not hunting. What she has done, in the ruins and the abandoned places, for 1500 years. The continent has never learned to hear it. The Bruxa has never stopped singing. The feeding. The Bruxa requires blood to survive. This is the clearest distinction between her and the true higher vampires, who do not require blood for survival and consume it for the experience rather than from necessity. For the Bruxa, blood is not optional. The absence of it over sufficient time produces deterioration, though what that deterioration looks like and how long it takes to become dangerous is not well documented by surviving observers. She feeds on human blood preferentially, and her hunting behavior reflects this preference. The reports from rural communities where Bruxi have been active over extended periods are consistent. Attractive young men disappear, or are found drained, or are found alive but changed in ways that communities struggle to articulate. The Bruxa moves quietly in darkness to emerge suddenly near her victim. The attack, when the camouflage has been maintained long enough and the prey is vulnerable enough, is fast. She does not draw out the feeding as entertainment. The feeding serves a purpose. When the purpose has been served, the body is discarded. This is the baseline. The baseline is modified significantly in the known cases of Bruxi who have chosen to maintain ongoing relationships with humans rather than hunting. These cases are documented. They are not common, but they are not unique. The Bruxa in such arrangements feeds on a willing partner, extends the partnership over time, and creates a dynamic that is difficult to categorize morally or practically. The human partner in these arrangements tends to know and not know what they are involved with simultaneously, to understand at some level that the creature they have accepted into their life is something other than what she appears, and to have constructed explanations or denials that allow the arrangement to continue. Nivelin's case is the one most thoroughly documented, because it ended in a way that left a witcher as witness. The cursed man and the Bruxa Verena had maintained their arrangement for years before Geralt of Rivia arrived. Nivelin knew what she was, more or less. He chose to remain. The Bruxa, for her part, was protecting him from the consequences of her feeding on the surrounding population. She hunted others rather than draining him, and she arranged conditions that kept travelers coming to the manor rather than the village, which was a form of consideration. Whether it was affection is a question that the available evidence does not resolve cleanly. The song she sang afterward, sitting in the dry fountain in the moonlight, in the language no one on the continent could understand, was the clearest indication that something more complex than pure predation was operating. Bruxi sing after they have fed. The singing in this case had a quality that observers described differently depending on their framework. Mourning, satisfaction, something in between. What it was not was the combat screech or the dream manipulation singing. It was something the Bruxa did for herself, in her own language, in the dark hours after blood had been taken. This is the detail that naturalistas and witchers who have studied the Bruxa most closely find most difficult to integrate into a clean account of the creature. The singing, the language no one else speaks, the behavior that serves no obvious predatory purpose. It suggests an interior life that the simplest accounts of the Bruxa do not accommodate. The hunt. The Bruxa does not hunt the way a wolf hunts, by direct pursuit and physical dominance. She hunts the way very few things in the world of the continent hunt, with patience and psychology and an accurate read of the specific vulnerabilities of the prey she has selected. The process begins with observation. The Bruxa who has chosen a location to inhabit, typically ruins, abandoned settlements, old manors, occasionally caves, always somewhere that human presence is occasional rather than constant, will have observed the patterns of the humans in the surrounding area before the first feeding. She knows the roads. She knows the schedules. She knows which travelers are likely to pass through and at what intervals, which settlements draw men away from their homes after dark, which of the surrounding population is most isolated, least protected, least likely to be immediately missed. The dream manipulation is the first tool she deploys, in cases where she has time and a fixed location to work from. A human who has been dreaming badly for weeks, whose sleep has been progressively invaded by the specific quality of darkness that the Bruxa's singing produces at range, is not the same human they were at the start of that process. They are more anxious, less rational, more drawn toward the relief that proximity to the source of the disturbance paradoxically offers. The Bruxa has arranged for the anxiety to be soothed by movement in a specific direction. When the prey arrives, they believe they chose to come. The invisibility that the Bruxa can achieve in certain conditions, not true invisibility in the way a mage might achieve it, but a capacity for stillness and position control that makes her effectively untrackable for most human observers, is the second tool. She moves through spaces without being seen. She positions herself relative to the prey without alerting them. The attack that follows the positioning is described by the few survivors of Bruxa encounters as seeming to come from nowhere, which is less a description of magic than of a predator who has made the preparation so thorough that the prey's attention is directed everywhere except the relevant direction. Less powerful Bruxa hunt in packs, sharing the work of cornering prey and consuming the results. This behavior is more common in populations that have not established a fixed territory with a reliable food supply. Nomadic hunting strategies that sacrifice the efficiency of the individual approach for the redundancy of numbers. A single Bruxa can be evaded by a prepared target. A pack of them, coordinating without sound in the way that telepathic communication allows, closing from multiple directions simultaneously, is considerably harder to evade. The aftermath of a Bruxa hunt in a given area is recognizable to a witcher who knows what to look for. The pattern of disappearances has a specific character. Young men taken at night in locations where there should not have been danger. The lack of bodies in some cases, the presence of drained bodies in others. The accounts from surviving community members of a woman seen in the area. A woman who was strange but did not obviously threaten. The reports of changed dreams in the period preceding the disappearances, which communities attribute to bad water or ill omens or the natural anxieties of people living in uncertain times, which is what changed dreams always are attributed to by those who have not yet encountered the Bruxa. Form and appearance. The Bruxa presents in human form as a womanoid, a creature that takes feminine presentation as its baseline rather than as a choice, across all known specimens. Every Bruxa documented by witchers and scholars over the centuries has presented female. Whether this is a property of the species itself, a feature of the world she came from, or something that occurred in the adaptation to this world after the conjunction, the research has not resolved. What is consistent is that the human form is always female, always young in appearance regardless of actual age, and always dark hair, very pale skin, eyes described in different accounts as black, dark gray, or anthracite, a color that does not quite correspond to any standard human eye color but reads at a distance as simply dark. She moves differently from a human woman. Not dramatically differently, the Bruxa is not so alien that her movement pattern immediately announces her nature, but with a quality that experienced trackers and witchers identify as uncanny. She is too still when she is still. She is too fast when she moves. Her stillness is the stillness of something that does not need to breathe consistently, that does not fidget, that has no nervous habits because nervousness is not part of her architecture. Her movement, when she chooses to move, has the quality of a predator's movement. efficient, purposeful, with none of the small inefficiencies that characterize human motion. This human form is the Bruxa's primary camouflage. She inhabits it completely and without apparent discomfort, moves through human spaces in it, is mistaken for a water nymph or a forest spirit by those who encounter her in remote locations and lack a better framework. The mistake is understandable. The long fangs and the unrestrained bloodthirst are the giveaway, but these are not always visible in the initial encounter. The Bruxa manages the reveal carefully when she has reason to manage it. When she does not have reason to manage it, the reveal is the last thing the observer sees. Her true form is a large black bat, or something close enough to a large black bat that the distinction is academic for most purposes. The transformation is complete and rapid. The creature that results has the sharp fangs and claws of the human form extended into a configuration built for attack at range and speed, a wingspan that allows fast aerial movement, and the physical power of a predator that has not needed to evolve any particular relationship with the concept of restraint. The bat form is not where the Bruxa hunts from choice. It is where she goes when the hunt has been acknowledged, when the pretense of the human form is no longer serving any purpose, when the time for the voice and the song and the dream walking has passed and what remains is the kill, the scream. The greatest threat a Bruxa poses to a witcher is not her claws, though the claws are significant. It is not her speed, though her speed is extraordinary. It is not her invisibility, though she can render herself difficult to track in certain conditions. It is her voice. The Bruxa can screech with a force that is not metaphorical. The shockwave produced by the cry is physical. It has struck witchers from their feet, driven the breath from their bodies, shattered the concentration necessary for sign casting, left experienced fighters disoriented and briefly blind in its aftermath. The Quen sign provides some protection against it. The Quen sign does not provide complete protection against it in all circumstances. A particularly powerful Bruxa can break through the barrier, leaving the witcher who trusted the sign to save them in a significantly worse position than one who had not trusted it at all and prepared differently. The voice is also the Bruxa's instrument for the other thing she does with sound, which is distinct from the combat screech and considerably more subtle. She sings. She sings in her native language, the language of whatever world she came from, a language that no scholar on the continent has been able to parse or classify, and the singing has a quality that the word beautiful does not quite capture and the word disturbing does not quite capture either. It is described as silent, which does not mean inaudible but means something more like the quality of sounds heard in dreams rather than in waking. Present but without clear origin, registered by the body before the mind has processed it. The singing works on humans at the dream level. It is the Bruxa's most patient weapon, the one that requires no physical proximity and leaves no trace that a physician could identify as injury. A healer summoned to a household where someone has been dreaming badly for weeks will find nothing wrong. The patient is simply not sleeping well. This is not a medical finding. It is a hunting strategy. Those who hear it do not necessarily remember hearing it. What they experience is their sleep changing character, their dreams acquiring a specific darkness that was not there before, their nights becoming a process of navigation through scenarios constructed by something outside them. The Bruxa can maintain this at distance, which means she does not need to be physically present to exert influence over someone she has marked. The dream manipulation is how she manages her food supply when she has chosen to stay in one location. A human who is being steadily influenced through altered dreams will come to the Bruxa, will make choices that bring them closer, will find reasons to justify proximity to something that a clearer mind would flee. The Bruxa does not need to chase her prey. She can arrange for her prey to come to her, which is a more sustainable approach to feeding than pursuit.